So I had a bit of a gift in my driveway this morning. Well, I wouldn't exactly say a gift. It's a job that he needs done by Sunday because he's got to get back out there and get to work. You see, the problem is this bucket has blades he can't get anymore, and he showed up with a very common blade that needs to be fitted up to the bucket. And it's a good thing he showed up when he did, because me and him found quite a bit more wear that we're going to have to fix as well. I did a job for him last year with a different bucket, and this is a leftover blade that we're actually going to fit up to the bottom here and kind of recycle it and make our money stretch a little bit on this job. One of the lucky steps that I had on this job here was all of the bolts actually came off, which completely surprised me because a lot of my experience is from the mine and nothing ever comes off proper when there's involved rocks and gravel. So when I hit this with the impact gun and it came off, it was a happy day. I had a few jobs where I spent all day cutting off bolts on machines just because the rocks have worn them away. And as everyone knows, I'm a pretty thrifty guy, so we're going to make sure that we recycle all this metal that we've got here because, yes, I do have a lot of mining background, but it kind of seems silly to take metal out of the ground only to put it in the ground again when we're done with it. So we're going to take this down to Richmond Steel later and actually turn it in and maybe get some beer money back out of it. I'm going to clean this off here using the holding the breath method. There was quite a bit of dust that kicked off of that, and we don't want to breathe that all in. The next step's pretty simple here. We're going to recycle this old blade and put it on the bottom of the bucket. I mean, we can't let that good steel go to waste, and you know what? At the price of some of these materials, we're just going to save them a couple bucks, and it's going to wear out anyways. But one of the challenges that I had with this is it's got a little bit of bow in it because it's worn. It's 4 inches or 4 1/8 close to the end, and towards the center is pretty close to 4 1/2. So I kind of roughly marked it all out. And then I'm going to use the tape measure as kind of like a chalk line, which I probably should have used and then modified it from there. But I'm going to use the tape measure kind of as a straight edge, and then I'm just going to bump some of the lines up just a little bit more, just in case, so that this is going to fit the first time. I mean, if I'm 1/8 of an inch out, that just means I put an 1/8 inch more of weld in there, and it's not that big of a deal. Now for the fun part of just doing a bit of cutting and getting those other plates off of there. Because remember, we want it to sit flat, right? And most of the material was completely worn away. And Corin is so lucky that he caught this so early, because if he went any longer, he was going to actually start wearing the bottom of this bucket out. And then the real money would have started, because I would have had to cut the bottom of the bucket out and re-welded everything up. And thanks to KBC Tools for sending me out the gloves. I really appreciate it. You can check these guys out in the link below. This project's going along pretty darn good, and I'm not really seeing any major issues like some projects have. And that's what makes this fun, hanging out and doing this with you. Let's rip the rest of these razor sharp pieces off here and throw them in the scrap trailer and finish cleaning everything up. The key here is to make sure that I don't have any divots or anything sticking up, or that plate's not going to fit on there as well. On the bottom side of that blade was quite a bit of a rolled edge, and it would probably get in the way of me actually welding this flat steel, so we had to make sure we cleaned that up as well. Now, it's just a matter of a strongman competition, the story of a one-man show, and, well, yes, I do have a crane over on the other side, but this thing just seems just big enough that I can manhandle it and move it around myself. This is one of my superpowers, actually, being 300 pounds. I can move stuff around at quite good ease, but X-ray vision is not. And I'm pretty sure a few of you guys can attest to this as well, crushing tools when you're moving something because you didn't clean up proper. And it's a bit of a yard sale out here today. Now let's roll this over here and get this blade fitted up. I'm really happy with how this blade's fitting together today. It's I couldn't have planned this any better, actually. I did cut a little bit of the blade off on the right end there, your left, and I'll show you a little problem that we're going to have here in a second. Now, this is an easy problem to solve, and there's a little bit of a trick for it as well. The rest of the blade is reasonably straight, and we're just going to start by welding it from one end to the other. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to be the guy working on this again, so we're not going to do one continuous bead that I'm going to have to torch off later, we're just going to do probably 2 or 3 inch strips in precise locations. Well, not precise locations, but reasonably set out locations of where it's going to wear good and it's going to hold it on. I made sure to weld the very end of it up really good, and then I'm going to weld about 2 or 3 inches from either end in. And then every slat that goes up and down vertically, you can see there, I'm going to weld a weld right across that. Now, one of the problems that I was having today is, if you notice there, the wind was picking up and carrying away all the gas that was coming out, and it was giving me a really porous weld. So I just grabbed a piece of scrap here, and that's going to block it from all the wind. The wind happened to die down after that, and I got lucky, and I just made some quick progress as fast as I could before the wind picked back up again. Now, here's a really cool trick. I wish I had been a little bit closer up to show you guys. So that bow that was on the end there, this is pretty simple here. I grabbed some scrap steel, and I'm just going to give it a really good tack weld, just a tack weld on the one side. And then I'm just going to lean on it with my right arm, and then I'm going to weld on the left hand there, and I'm going to tack this on. This is a really, really simple, but very, oh my goodness. This is one of the techniques that I kind of picked up off of YouTube from watching a couple guys in Europe welding up buckets as well. And although it's super simple, I mean, unless you've seen it done, or, you know, you've been out in the field and had to do it, it's not something you might have thought of right out of the gate. Now for my favorite part of the whole project is fitting the blade to the bucket. Now we are going to need some C-clamps here because we're going to hold this blade on as we do it. We really lucked out with this job here that none of the holes from the new blade line up with any of the holes from the old blade. And it's not a big deal. If they had, we would have just had to kind of weld and fill them up and then grind them down and then go from there. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a C-clamp on that one side and get it roughly close to what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to throw a Bessie clamp on the other side. Now, I did do this a couple times off camera before I figured out exactly where it was going to sit. So, full disclaimer, I did do some monkeying around. Now, let's grab the mag drill here, and I'll talk you through the whole process as I'm doing it. There's a few tricks, actually, that I learned today that saved me a ton of time on drilling this. The first trick was getting the right annular bit. Now, this annular bit here fits perfectly in that square hole there, and it just kisses the side a tiny bit. Now, one of the drawbacks is it's probably a 16th too big for the hole size for these bolt holes. However, these bolt holes are going to be centered, and we're not going to have problems later with warping the blade when we bolt this down, or breaking bolts if they're sideways. The second one was here, because of some of the steel that goes into the bucket here, this annular bit has a carbide tipped blade, and it's got 6 teeth on it. So as I'm working through this job, it's actually going to harden just a tiny bit because it's going to get hot, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. High-speed steel, I might end up wearing out one of those bits if I wasn't careful putting coolant on it. And a little side note here, with carbide tipped blades, you only put coolant on it once, and then you don't put any on more while it's hot. Because if you do, it'll end up cracking your carbide tipped blades, and then you'll just have a whole mess of problems. Let's grab these trusty gloves and knock some of these sharp ribbons off here, and we'll start fitting the bolts in here. With the blade that Corin purchased came all of the hardware that I'm going to need for the job, except some washers. You've probably noticed that I haven't drilled the holes yet where the Bessie clamps are, and I'm just going to rattle all these bolts on first, and then I'm going to go back and drill those as well. If I was to risk taking the clamp off right now, I'd risk moving the bolt hole alignment, and then I'd risk having some problems. Now check out this castle nut here. The purpose of this castle nut here is it's like a locking washer. It's a mechanically metal locking washer. You could use split washers to do this job, but today I'm just going to use flat washers instead. The purpose of the flat washers, remember, is I've got it a little bit bigger hole size, and I want to distribute that load over the whole mass. And second important thing, a little bit of experience here. I'm going to make sure that there's washers underneath there, because if these bolts get rounded or washed off, there's a possibility that I might have to come back and take these off with the torch later on, which would be a really quick technique of getting the bolt off. And having that washer as a little spacer between the bucket and the nut will probably save me a ton of time later, and I won't cut into his bucket with the torch. This thing's looking pretty badass, but we're not done quite yet. Hold on. Remember those holes that we had there that were sitting on the other side from the other blade? We're going to have to flip this bad boy over, and we're going to have to do something about those holes. I'm sure we could leave those holes wide open, but it'll end up causing problems later if we do. You see now, if we were to weld these holes up right now, obviously we'd be welding that blade to the bucket, and that'd be a whole slew of problems. So lucky for me, in my chip tray, I had some 5/8 stubs that were cut off from a previous project, and we're just going to throw those stubs in the hole. So let's go back out front here and take these slugs and go fit them up in the hole and weld these up. And the owner of LKW Corin was super supportive of me doing some welding with the apprentices on the bucket. And his direct words were, "It's not structural, and we're not going to see it, so it's a great place to practice." And both of these young men were super inexperienced with welding, and I was really impressed with how quick these boys picked up this welding and were off to the races with it. And I'm sure both of them were very intimidated by it, because they were told their whole life, really, that they should be scared of electricity and not go near it. And now I'm making them hold this gun that shoots electricity and rod onto a project, and it melts it in a big fiery mess. But they both quickly overcame their anxieties, and they did a fantastic job with the welding here. Even at some points, I got to sit back and relax and let them do all the work. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video today as much as I did, and I enjoyed hanging out with you guys, and we'll catch you on the next one. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, check out my next video. I'm sure you're going to like it just as much as this one. And also, remember, get out there, build something, keep it safe, and most importantly, have fun.